Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. I think it's safe to say that barring anything unforeseen, the Kansas City Chiefs are going to be set at the quarterback position for a long period of time. There won't be any quarterback controversies taking place over there for the next decade, as Patrick Mahomes is going to be starting and stealing the show wherever he goes. For the younger generation of Chiefs fans, they're going to be spoiled by fantastic quarterback play, and are going to be growing up during a fun time to be a Chiefs fan. For the older generation of Chiefs fans, however, watching Mahomes play is a moment where they think to themselves, it's about time. Because after what they had to endure a quarterback in the 1980s, yeah, they deserve this. This is Kansas City Chiefs head coach Frank Gansz. He's terrible. He's the worst head coach in the history of the Chiefs. And you could say he's one of the worst 5 or 10 coaches in the history of the NFL if you wanted to. In fact, I did an entire video on just how bad he was, including the unforgivable offense of getting the job primarily because of his military background, only for people to realize afterwards that he made it all up and that none of what he said about his military background was true. You can learn more about that debacle by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But aside from that, he was just genuinely not a good head coach. And perhaps no display exemplified this incompetence more than his 1987 debacle against the Pittsburgh Steelers, where he completely bungled his quarterback situation and made absolutely no sense in trying to rationalize and justify it afterwards. This is the story behind the worst quarterback decision by a coach in the over 60-year history of the Kansas City Chiefs. Before I talk about the controversy in question, we need some context to understand how the team was playing, who their quarterback was, and how the game was going to the point where what Frank Gansz decided to do, or rather not do, was viewed as completely idiotic, and for good reason. Through the first 7 games of the abbreviated 15-game 1987 season due to the strike, the Kansas City Chiefs were the worst team in football. After making the playoffs the year before, Gansz, in his first season, had the team playing some of its worst football ever. They were 1-6, which gave them sole possession of the worst record in the AFC, and made them tied with a few teams for the worst record in the NFL. They scored just 117 points, which was the worst total in the 28-team league. They allowed 232 points, which was the worst total, and naturally, they had the worst point differential at minus 115. And they were on a 6-game losing streak, as after beating the Chargers on opening day, it was rock bottom from that point on. However, if there was any bright spot, and I use that term incredibly loosely because this team stunk, it was the play of their starting quarterback, Bill Kenney. Todd Blackledge got the start in the first 2 games, and was wildly ineffective. And then, games 3 through 5 were played with the replacement players, with legends like Matt Stevens, Alex Espinoza, and Doug Hudson lining up under center. When the strike ended, Gansz decided that he was going to roll with Bill Kenney as his new starting quarterback. Kenney had started games for the Chiefs every year since 1980, and in 1983, even made the Pro Bowl when he led the league in completions and threw 24 touchdowns. By this point, Kenney was an established veteran, and even though the Chiefs lost both of his first 2 starts, it was through no fault of his own. For the first time all season, the Chiefs' offense actually looked like it had some life in it, as Kenney threw 6 touchdown passes over those 2 games, including 4 in their 31-28 loss to the Chicago Bears in the game before the one we're going to talk about here. Over those 2 games, Kenney had a passer rating of 105.8, and obviously, while extrapolating that number across an entire season is unrealistic, if it held, it would have been the top passer rating in the league in 1987. He was that good. That's the good news. The bad news was that entering their Week 9 matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers, as if it wasn't going to be hard enough considering the fact that this was the team's first real home game since opening day, and since they were on a 6-game losing streak, their quarterback was injured pretty badly, dealing with a hairline fracture in his wrist. Granted, it was his non-throwing wrist, but you still need that to be able to be effective, as you still have to withstand the beating of opposing defensive linemen, and still have to hold onto the ball with it and grip the ball. Still, despite the injury, Gansz was going to have Kenney play, and was going to have Kenney get the start in this one as the team tried to snap its embarrassing 2-month-long skid. There are some instances where a quarterback plays well in the face of adversity, and plays some incredible football despite being badly injured. Houston Oilers quarterback Dan Pastorini did this in the 1978 wildcard against the Miami Dolphins, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Tom Brady played at Super Bowl 55 with a fully torn MCL. This was not one of those moments, because watching Bill Kenney on this day was as painful on our eyes as it was painful on his wrist. Anyone expecting that the Chiefs would be able to snap their losing streak was sorely mistaken, because when the final whistle sounded, the Steelers walked away from Arrowhead victorious, prevailing by a final score of 17-16. The Chiefs got absolutely nothing going offensively, scoring on 3 field goals and scoring on a fumble return for a touchdown. So their lone touchdown didn't even come on the offensive side of the ball. Pittsburgh gained 250 rushing yards and over 5 yards per carry, had 25 first downs compared to just 15 for the Chiefs, had 391 yards of total offense compared to 224 for the Chiefs, and held onto the ball for over 34 minutes. In many ways, it was surprising that the game was only decided by 1 point, because if you didn't know any better and just looked at the box score, the Steelers looked like the dominant team. However, how did Bill Kenney play? He was atrocious. It's tough to blame the guy. He's a quarterback with a broken wrist, and he got even more injured during the game, as not only did his wrist injury get worse, as is to be expected when you have a broken wrist and are asked to grip a football 60 or so times in a game in both passing and running situations, but he took quite a few hits, including 4 sacks, and suffered a right shoulder and right knee injury, to the point where doctors took an extensive look at him during the game. By the time Kenney finished the game, his stat line was a far cry from that of the previous 2 weeks, as he finished the game going 14 for 29 with no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and a passer rating of 25, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. I'll put it this way. You're not going to win too many games when your starting quarterback throws no touchdowns and 4 interceptions. And just for some more perspective on how bad Kenney's game was, this was just the 2nd time in his career that he finished a game with no touchdowns and 4 interceptions, and was the first time he ever finished a home game with that stat line. Additionally, Kenney played in 84 games in his NFL career by that point, and this was only the 3rd time that he threw 4 interceptions in a game. Especially after his 4-touchdown game against the Bears the week before, which was one of the best games of his career, this was an uncharacteristically bad performance. Yet despite clearly being injured, and despite his poor play, Kenney played the full 60 minutes, and was not yanked by head coach Frank Gansz. After the game, all the talk was about why Gansz opted not to make the change that seemingly everyone with eyeballs was clamoring for. Well, prepare yourselves for some of the stupidest logic you're ever going to hear, because if you thought this decision was bad on paper, don't worry. It's about to get a million times worse. After the game, Gansz was naturally asked about why he didn't take Bill Kenney out of the game, and why he didn't change quarterbacks when his starter was playing so poorly and was clearly injured. Now, if Gansz said something like, "Kenney told me he was good to go, and he's been in the league long enough and has played and started enough games where I have no reason not to believe him, and he knows his body better than I do," then this is a non-story, and this is just a case of a guy thinking he could play through the pain and the coach trusting his veteran. But Gansz did not say that. There was no way in good faith he could say that. As Kenney said after the game on his wrist injury, "It affected me. I didn't have a real good week of practice. You don't come out and throw the ball well for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, you turn into a sham overnight." I mean, Kenney was down for an extended period of time and was being looked at by doctors on multiple occasions throughout the game. So clearly, Gansz couldn't do that. This meant that Gansz had 2 options in the post-game press conference. Option 1 was to admit that he probably made a mistake, and that even though Kenney's a good quarterback and has played well for the Chiefs lately, that he should have gone with someone healthier. Option 2 was to lie and make something up that made no sense whatsoever. Guess what option Gansz went with? Because when you break down these post-game comments, oh boy, they make no sense whatsoever. He was asked quite bluntly about why Frank Seurer, the backup quarterback who played in the USFL and was somewhat of a legend when he played in college at Kansas for the Jayhawks, didn't go into the game. And Gansz said, "There was a possibility today for Frank Seurer to get into the game. I feel he's ready now to play football for the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't want to put Frank in a position where he cannot handle it for whatever reason, but there's no question in my mind. I don't think he's ready to start, but I think he's ready and capable of playing for the Chiefs." Timeout. How does that make any sense? He's not ready to start, but he's ready to play? First off, he wasn't even asked to start in this game, so that doesn't even apply here. But if this was a different position, like a defensive lineman where you don't think they're ready to play every down, but you think they've earned the right to get on the field in 3rd down situations, or a running back where you don't think they're ready for 20 carries a game, but they're ready for 5 or so, that's one thing. I totally get that. But this is a quarterback that we're talking about. You don't swap quarterbacks on every play. You don't rotate guys in and out. You keep a quarterback in, and once he's in, he's in. How can a quarterback not be ready to start, but be ready to play? How does that make any sense? Especially if you're not going to wind up playing him when your starter is clearly hobbled and is injured. And if he wasn't ready to go into the game, even though you said he was, and you were so scared of putting him in a situation where he couldn't handle it, even though you said he could, then why would you have him warm up on the sidelines? Why would he be warming up and possibly going into the game if you thought he shouldn't be in the game? You can't even use the excuse of they only have 2 quarterbacks, so even if you don't want to put him in, you might have to if Kenny can't go. Because the Chiefs have 3 quarterbacks on their roster, and Todd Blackledge was active and was also warming up during the game. So if we're following Frank Gansz's logic here, Frank Seurer is more than ready to play, but he's not ready to go out there while the starter is injured. Even Seurer questioned the logic that Gansz was using in the post-game press conference, saying, "They haven't come out and said anything, but I think they're leery of putting me in there. I want in there no matter what the situation." When the starter is saying he was injured, and the backup is questioning what the heck you're doing, that's not a good sign. But don't worry, it gets worse, because 2 days later, Gansz met with the media again and talked about why he didn't play Seurer and take out the clearly injured and ineffective Bill Kenney. And Gansz had no idea what anyone was talking about, because he told reporters, "Had the opportunity arisen last week, I would have put in Frank Seurer." I'm sorry, what? What do you mean that the opportunity wasn't there last week? Your starting quarterback was playing poorly and was dealing with a right shoulder injury, a right knee injury, and oh yeah, a fractured wrist. Last time I checked, you need to be able to have your quarterback grip a football. Last time I checked, it is painful to grip a football with a fractured wrist, and trying to grip things can aggravate the injury more. You're telling me that there was no opportunity for Seurer to get into the game, even though your starting quarterback was injured, and even though you literally had Seurer warming up. Why even have him warm up? Imagine if a Major League Baseball manager, wait, never mind, I'll use a different example because it's tough to even think about and stomach Major League Baseball right now. Imagine if a college baseball manager decided that he was going to have a pitcher throwing in the bullpen and loosening up, and he doesn't go into the game. And afterwards, the manager said that he had no intentions of ever putting him in the game. That manager would be fired on the spot for how poorly he handled his bullpen. Yeah, that's exactly what Frank Gansz did here. Nothing about this situation makes any sense. In 2021, when legendary Jacksonville Jaguars head coach Urban Meyer doubled the team's win total from the previous year and did amazing things such as, he told the press that he had no idea why James Robinson wasn't playing, and he spoke highly of safety Andre Cisco and how well he was playing and progressing, even though Cisco played a grand total of 0 snaps in that aforementioned game. I didn't think it was possible at the time for a coach to be that clueless about the snap counts and the inner workings of his team. Yet apparently, it was incredibly possible, because Frank Gansz did the same thing by saying that Seurer both was and wasn't ready to go in, and by contradicting himself about 100 times. And look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Frank Seurer was the answer, and pretend that if the Chiefs took Kenny out and put Seurer in the game, that things would have been different. Seurer was not a good quarterback. He wound up starting the next 2 games after Kenny was too hurt to go, and in those games, he lost both of them and won 26 for 55, completing 47% of his passes with no touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and a passer rating of 36.9, which, well, you know the drill. If Gansz thought Seurer wasn't ready to go in against the Steelers and thought that an injured Bill Kenney gave them a better chance of winning, fine. Even though we're just ignoring the fact that there was a third option on the bench in Todd Blackledge, who was completely healthy. But why did Gansz feel the need to go in circles, and why did Gansz have no idea what he was talking about? Because when you say you don't want to put your quarterback in a bad spot, and yet you have him warm up, you talk about how he's ready to play, and you say how he would have played last week if the opportunity was there, even though said opportunity was so big and so blatant that it could be seen from outer space, you make it seem like you have no idea what you're doing. It's not surprising in the slightest bit that Gansz faltered in the NFL, going 8-22-1 in his 2 seasons with the Chiefs, and finishing with a winning percentage of 27.4%. He was completely out of his element, and with how badly he mishandled the situation, it is not hard to see why. The moral of the story, if you're a head coach, is that if you're going to make a controversial decision regarding your quarterback, at least make sure that your story adds up and that your reasoning stays consistent. Because if it doesn't, you're going to look like a moron. No one knew what Frank Gansz was talking about at the time in the immediate aftermath of the game, and roughly 3.5 decades later, still no one knows what the heck he meant by these comments. The old saying is that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. But with the Chiefs in 1987, the saying was that if you have 2 quarterbacks, but one of them isn't ready to start, but is ready to play, but just needs an opportunity, but shouldn't be given that opportunity when the starter is hobbled and can't throw a football, you have a whole host of issues. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.